Hi, Harry. How are you?
Hi, Abigail. I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. So, thanks for coming online to chat to us today. So we are currently carrying out a fire workshop in Nairobi, and we also have a team joining from London. So before we really kind of get into the details of why we're talking to you, would you please be able to introduce yourself to the rooms?
Of course, yeah, no, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Harry Wright. I'm a lawyer based here in London. I'm also the CEO and founder of the environmental sustainability company called Bright Tide, and also the CEO of the environmental charity, the Conservation Project. So, yeah, really happy to speak with you today on this really important subject.
Harry? Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So what we'd like to chat to you about today, especially with your expertise in conservation and law, is about well, why we're here. So we've been well, in the last 2 days we've been speaking about fire management across protected area landscapes. So what fire is a recognized rangeland management tool, especially in savanna ecosystems which do rely on fire, but also increasingly in forested and woodland habitats as a fuel reduction mechanism to prevent large wildfires. So here in Kenya and across many countries globally, fire is banned at the national level, preventing these practices. So, I would like to ask you if you could share your advice maybe with the rooms on how to go about sort of influencing policy at the national level so these sorts of management practices can be introduced in local community settings and in protected areas.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. Well, firstly, it's a really interesting subject, and congratulations on all the work everyone's doing in the room. So just to maybe talk through a bit of my background in sort of law and policy and applying that to conservation and to climate change and working with both on the national and international level. So I've done quite a bit of work when I was working at Clienturf, which is the public interest environmental law firm. And through that experience, we worked with forest communities based in West and Central Africa. And what we were doing there, and maybe you can apply some of these principles to your work on the fire side, was we were looking at the different governing international legal frameworks around forest protection, whether that's things like REDD Plus, for example, which is the climate finance mechanism for looking after tropical forests, and also national legislation and local legislation as well. So when we were working in different African countries, one of the ways in which we try to bring all of these key stakeholders together was by organizing a series of workshops. And at those workshops, we would bring together parliamentarians from the national governments, people from international multilateral organizations like the World Bank, for example, and then we would have local stakeholders as well. And to make that process as inclusive as possible, we worked with a lot of women-led organizations who had a really great understanding of the local knowledge and knew very much about the local issues that were going on. And then, you go to the next level where you work on the national sort of framework side, where it might be a parliamentarian, might be someone from the sort of Ministry of Law, or someone who has oversight on the national legislation, someone from the environmental department, for example, and then also bring together the international frameworks. And it's really important when you are thinking about either changing local laws or national laws that you really bring all of these key stakeholders together. So that was a really interesting way, and we adopted that on community-based forestry laws and looking at legal rights with indigenous communities as well. And it was a really successful. I mean, it does take quite a long time in terms of local groups putting forward their ideas and solutions around local legislation and integrating that within national legislation. You have to sometimes go through the parliamentarian process in terms of enabling and enacting those laws, which can take quite a long time. So it's really important that you are able to include the local stakeholders throughout the process, not just through bringing together fire workshops, whether it's virtually or in person, but actually enabling a process where local stakeholders are really involved at every single stage of the process when it comes to changing a law. And one idea might be to draw up like a roadmap, for example, of the different stages of how the legal process actually happens, and ensuring that you have meetings and updates and regular catch-ups, and there is oversight from local stakeholders. They have a seat at the table. So that's one way in which you can address this sort of legislative process. And it's quite time consuming. It can be quite technical, can be quite frustrating sometimes. But I think communication is really important in enabling those sort of communication flows throughout the process. Another way in which we've also worked a lot. So we worked on an issue in Mexico with the vaquita, which is a very small porpoise. It's critically endangered. I think less than 10 left in the world, lives in the Sea of Cortez. And through this, through trying to look at the legislative frameworks in place to actually protect the vaquita, we held what was called a virtual kind of hackathon, virtual workshop, where we brought together lawyers from across the world. This was an international issue, not just relevant to Mexico's jurisdiction. And lawyers, we had a number of different challenge areas we were looking at, whether it was international law, we were looking at local-based Mexican law, what's going on there, looking at how the UN process can play a role in helping to protect the species, and also many different areas of law like arbitration, looking at commercial litigation processes, sometimes looking at criminal law as well. And what we did is that we had the lawyers work on these different subsets over a two-day period, and they put together the sort of frameworks for a legal white paper. So legal white papers are a really good way of tackling a really complex subject. So with fires, for example, and looking at all of the different routes to change that specific piece of legislation, and having groups of lawyers sort of working together and then putting together a series of analysis, analyzing the legal changes, and then having a set of recommendations. So that was a really good way in which we addressed that particular issue, and we created a legal white paper with an international law firm. The next stage for us now on that piece of work is to actually take those recommendations and bring together parliamentarians here in could be here in Britain, it could be in Mexico, but bringing together again those key stakeholders who can enact those legal changes or be aware of those legal changes. So holding like a roundtable discussion or after you've done the legal white paper to discuss those findings is also a really good way in which you can bring together those sort of key stakeholders. And then following on from that roundtable discussion, so an example is here in the UK, we have these all parliamentary party groups, where I was just at one last week, which was looking at regenerative farming. And we had a parliamentarian who was talking through some of the government's policies on environmental land management schemes. And we invited an audience of people from the sector, but also key stakeholders like farmers, could be someone from Savills, which is a building company, real estate company. So and we had a very open dialogue and discussion. And the idea is that the parliamentarian will gather feedback on a specific piece of legislation, a bit like a consultation process, for example, and then can use that consultation and that feedback to then make those changes to the law if they see fit. So I think having a legal white paper, having the roundtable discussion, having like an open sort of forum where people can discuss these different ideas and procedures is also a really good way to connect the dots and bring all those sort of key stakeholders together. So I hope that sort of helps, just sort of a few ideas on how to really address this from a legal perspective.
Perfect. No, thank you so much, Harry. I think that's really useful because, I mean, Kenya is a huge country. So, and even in this workshop, we've got people from all over the country. So I think it's nice to know that there is a way that people can kind of come together in, different contexts and ecosystems to sort of influence change. Here, the fire ban is actually within conservation policy. So that was really useful, speaking about your experience in sort of general, in wildlife conservation in general, because I think if we sort of can tackle it from a conservation kind of perspective, then we might be able to influence change more so than just attacking wildfire. So yeah, that was really useful, and I hope everyone in both Nairobi and Kenya has found that useful, but also everyone tuning in online from London who are also carrying out this sorts of research all across the world, so in every continent in every country. So yeah, that was really, really helpful. Thank you, Harry.
That's a pleasure. I just want to add one more thing, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
One of the things which is really helpful as well is when you're working in different jurisdictions, is building a network of local lawyers, because certain different local areas will have, as many people know on the school, will have different laws and procedures. and you have to be sort of a technical expert to really understand the laws in different areas. So I think having a really good network in different jurisdictions or different areas that can understand local laws, indigenous customs and things like that, that is also really fundamental to bring those key stakeholders together and for them to actually have a seat at the table on the legislative process as well.
Absolutely. I actually think in the Kenyan context specifically as well, that would be very important. I mean, the country's so big, every area is so different, different communities, different practices. So that's really good advice. Thank you, Harry.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, and best of luck.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.